We are still waiting for Rand Paul, so right now let's go ahead and bring in veteran Republican strategist Kurt Bardella joins us. Kurt, as you join in on this right now, we have been discussing a lot of the various issues here, but as a strategist, when Rand Paul takes the podium here in mere moments, what, in your opinion, does he have to put out front? What does he have to say in order to grab people by the throat?
Well, I think for Senator Paul, this is one of the first opportunities that he's going to have on a large scale before a large audience with a tremendous amount of media exposure to define himself and cast himself and project the type of image that he wants to have and control going forward. And really the first opportunity for broad audiences to contemplate the idea of Rand Paul being their commander-in-chief one day. I think you're going to see him rely heavily on his non-Washington background and his time as a doctor. His campaign is going to be very much running the kind of the outsider's campaign. That he's not a creature of Washington. He's not held hostage to the Beltway and the traditional establishment ways. He's going to try to project all of that as being really the bad thing in politics and what's broken in politics, and run as a different type of politician that transcends the demagoguery that often completely impedes any type of progress, and channel those libertarian base that he has a real strong and stranglehold over versus all the other candidates. He really does have a built-in, very passionate audience that isn't fractured, which is very different from most of the other Republican Party elements, and try to harness that into a broader movement.
Let me touch on something that you mentioned here, Kurt, because you use the phrase a different type of politician. Honestly, we have heard that from a number of people. They always tell us that. What exactly is a different type of politician that the American people will react to?
Well, I think you're going to, whether it's positive or negative, we'll find out. But I think what you see from Senator Paul is the willingness to talk about a very broad range of issues that oftentimes you see a lot of candidates and political figures not want to have any type of conversation about, whether it be the situation with how many people are incarcerated in this country, whether it be the legalization of drugs, whether it be different views, very contrasting views on foreign policy. Rand Paul is many things, but one of the things he's not is a cookie-cutter, prototypical politician. That's either going to work for him or not. We'll find out shortly. But that's really what distinguishes him from everybody else running in this contest.
With Judson, too, we had talked about this. Judson Phillips on the other side, we had mentioned the whole military issue, because there is no doubt that the Hawks are going to come out, and they are going to be the ones who will take a hard run at Rand Paul. Matter of fact, they're doing it already. $1 million worth of television ads from the same company, the same production firm, if you will, PR firm, that was involved in the Swift boating issue several years ago. They are hammering hard away at him regarding that and how they continue to call him an isolationist, and he is not necessarily on the side of the military. How's he going to fight that here, Kurt, knowing full well that in many eyes we are under attack every single day from people like ISIS, who knows about al-Shabaab, certainly what's happening in Israel, and the fact that we have a number of homegrown terrorists every single day?
Well, it is a unique situation where you have a candidate, a Republican candidate, who frankly has problems with the hawkish side of the Republican Party, as well as with Democrats, of course, too. But also I think that he's banking on the idea that by talking about very different issues, trying to reach people in a much different way than traditional political campaigns, that's going to cut through the clutter. And ultimately, the type of ads that we're going to see run right now, the $1 million buy against him in New Hampshire, Iowa, South Carolina, I think he's banking that actual play in his favor, that he's the only person who can stand on the stage and say, hey, look, the establishment hates me. The Democrats hate me because I'm telling the truth. I'm telling a different story. And at the end of the day, aren't you tired of the same old that we're hearing year in and year out, every election cycle? Here's someone saying different. Here are my ideas. I think he's banking that some of these attacks will actually help him.
Is it possible, just possible here, Kurt, that he cannot get out from behind the shadow of his father, who lost 3 times?
Well, it's really funny. You're seeing actually right now is just watching some of the news coverage of this and people talking about the placement of his father, Congressman Ron Paul, on the stage, but not with a speaking role, close but not too close to him in proximity. I think that his challenge is going to be to try to harness the foundation that was built by Ron Paul's runs and the grassroots support that he was able to build and translate that into a much broader movement. The reality is Rand Paul needs to show and prove that he can reach more than just that libertarian base to be a real relevant contender going forward.
All right, so let's go forward then. Judson, let's get back to you on this, where we have heard an awful lot of this. We still have to come back to the fact that, isn't it fair to say that people many times still look at Rand Paul and they believe things that he claims that he is not? As a matter of fact, I come back to the isolationist side of things because people say that that's what he is, following in the footsteps of his father, yet he continues to say that is not what I am. I am not like my father. He can't shake it. How does he shake it?
Well, that's a good question, and that's a tightrope. I'm not sure how he walks, because he's branded as a Paul, and to a certain extent, he does need to shake his father's image, but to a certain extent, he needs to hold on to that libertarian base, and I'm not sure how you accomplish both. And by the way, there's one other thing that we haven't talked about that's worth throwing in there, because you've talked a couple of times about the issue of the Hawks and Rand Paul. There's a sub-issue to that, and that would be the evangelical Christians and Ron Paul and his views on Israel, because Ron Paul was widely viewed by a lot of people as anti-Israel and somewhat anti-Semitic, and a lot of evangelical Christian voters are going to translate that view straight down to Rand Paul as well, because of his semi-isolationist views, and in a lot of ways that may really hurt Rand Paul with a larger Republican base.
Is he the sort of a candidate, then, that far right-wing base of the Republican Party, and I put this to you, Judson, is he the type of candidate, Rand Paul, that they would vote for?
Some of them would, some of them wouldn't. And part of it, Rand Paul has his opportunity right now. The old truism, you only get one chance to make a first impression. A lot of people, this is the first impression for Rand Paul, and he better not blow it today. He better come up with a very well-crafted outreach. Now, the Republican base that you're talking about, and by the way, I just call them real Americans or mainstream Americans, not far right. But yeah, these are the people that Rand Paul clearly has to reach. And in the next few minutes, when he steps on the stage, we're going to find out how good he is at his outreach. Because there's some things Rand Paul does very, very well. He harps on certain issues and can really capitalize on them. Like, for example, the drone filibuster of a couple of years ago. But what's he going to be able to do when it comes to connecting to that larger than the libertarian base, the mainstream Republican base, the mainstream conservative Republican base? And, I mean, Rand Paul's going to answer that question for us in a few minutes.
Kurt Bardella, what does Rand Paul have to avoid today and in these early stages, in these early stages of the campaign?
I think, especially as he goes out and the type of structure we're going to see from him, a lot of town halls, a lot of interaction with voters. He's going to be doing a lot of interviews on the cable news and broadcast news circuit. And I think in all of that, a lot of tough questions are going to come his way, a lot about social issues. Do you believe that business owners should be able to turn away anyone they want based on their own religious beliefs? I think he needs to avoid saying things, reacting to things that basically close big doors to pockets of voters. I think that he needs to show that he can be a broader candidate outside of the libertarian movement, and frankly, not say anything that people might perceive or be able to make fun of as crazy. It's almost trying to pass what I would call the Jon Stewart test a little bit. If you give give monologue fodder to the late night comics and the daily shows and Saturday Night Live, you're in trouble. We saw how powerful that can be. We saw what happened with Sarah Palin. The majority of Americans in this country shaped their perception of Sarah Palin off of Tina-Fey's caricature of her. And so you have to avoid playing into that, because there's already kind of that skeptical eye looking at Rand Paul, kind of that mindset that this is a guy who could say or do anything at any time. I think he needs to show a little bit more polish, a little bit in control, message discipline, in the first 72 hours of this campaign.
You mentioned the Jon Stewart effect, and again, it's so funny because we now speak of it as it is real. It is a real political force in this country right now, what he did. He basically, in many ways, humanized, made fun of a lot of these candidates, and they had to run with that. They had to basically get along with that, because if they didn't, his audience would turn against the candidate very quickly. We saw that happen. Gentlemen, I tell you what, hold on just a moment. Hold on to that thought.